Welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here tonight on our topic of Indigenous Futurisms. I just wanted to start out with a few housekeeping information for you. This is going to be more of a discussion and throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or comments or just anything you'd like to, any kind of input or insight you'd like to share with us or for us to discuss, please, you can ask directly in the Q&A, or you can ask a question just for the panelists, and we will be able to see those. And so we'll get started. My name's Melody. I am a Native American Heritage Coordinator for the Missouri Humanities Council, and I am Navajo from Arizona.
All right. Ani bojo, wabazikwe n'indigenous cause, wabajijin dodam, wasaxing the tonjaba, Tronton and Dow. I'm Maria Hupfield. I'm an Anishinaabe from Wasaxing First Nation, and I live in Toronto.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I am so excited about this. I've been excited about this for a few weeks. Thank you for joining us on your Wednesday evening. Oh my goodness, thought it was Thursday. So I just want to start out with an acknowledgement here in Missouri. So we begin by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral lands of the Osage people, or the borderless lands were also inhabited by the Illini, Iowa, Missouri, Oto, Quapaw, Sioux, Sac and Fox, and Kansa, ancestral inhabitants who were removed unjustly, and that we in this community are the beneficiaries of that removal. We honor them as we live, work, and study here in Missouri. So Maria's up in Ontario, and we give you the spotlight for, whose territory you are on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just blown away by the number of nations that are named on your acknowledgement. That's super amazing. So I'm back home on the Anishinaabe territory, so in Toronto, but Toronto is known as a city that has been a gathering place for a long time. So there's been a lot of different nations that have been through here. And most recently, we acknowledged the Mississauga of the Credit. And the treaty that we like to name is A Dish with One Spoon, which in naming that also acknowledges the other nations that were here. I also like to take that a step further. A little sneak peek there. Take that a step further and also acknowledge all the urban Indigenous people who now call Toronto home.
Thank you. So we're going to get started. I know that Indigenous Futurisms might be a new, and not a lot of people are very familiar with it. So can you see, Maria, just the PowerPoint, or can you see like the extra?
I'm seeing an amazing screen with 2 images of artists' work and some quotes. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not sure if you could see like everything else I'm trying to see, because I know someone raised their hand, so I was just making sure that wasn't popping up. Okay, so the Indigenous Futurisms, and we'll expand on this more. We just wanted to start out with who coined the term and the phrase is Dr. Grace Dillon, Anishinaabe, at Portland State University, and she was building on Afrofuturisms. And my quote there says, she's an experiment in placing Indigenous people in future settings. And it's a really great article. I really love how she talks about, the future of using our medicines, but also recognizing that these futures are places where we adapt and evolve to and live in. UFOs are living on spaceships. We're still making our medicines work for us. So, and also I really like this other quote from Lindsay Nixon. She's an Anishinaabe writer, curator, community organizer, and researcher. And she says, the future imaginary becomes a realm within which Indigenous artists express disconnection from kinship and land, a medicinal space to imagine new futures for Indigenous life, a way of being, relating, resisting, and resurging through love. So I want to connect that to these two images here that I particularly have been drawn to in terms of, my own research of what this means and to Native people. So this first image comes from one of Marvel Comics' Indigenous artist who is called, look at my notes, Amka, and she's an Inuit teenager as a part of their superhero series in the comic books. And I really like this because it's connecting, this to, I'm sure, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's, Comic-Con, and of course, Natives found a way to indigenize that space. And now there's an IndigiCon, which is an Indigenous version of Comic-Con. And so this image was used in one of their events to talk about how we, indigenize these spaces, we decolonize them and make them our own. And it becomes, another voice that we can speak of and use and, recognizing our own power and our own selves and, in the comic books. And so this next, I have to move us over. So the next image I really like, I love this. It captured me and it made me think about myself and my work to decolonize and reclaim myself and my identity. This is Dana Danger. She's Métis and Saulteaux in Polish. And this, I love this because it talks about how, she talks about how ourselves and our identity as Native people have been pretty much taken from us. We've been told, this is who you are in your sexuality, in your individuality, in your genders. And for me as a Native person, in our own traditional ways as a Navajo person, we have more than two genders. We have several genders that are all sacred in their own right. And so coming back to these spaces and recognizing that it's a source of, reclaiming our individuality. And also a big thing that really spoke out to me with this is the self-determination of our own bodies. I really like that. You have any more thoughts, Maria, on that?
Well, I'm just basking in this. I really, I'm so aware of how much of how in the world, the way that I see myself, the way that that once you go in the world, you realize, oh, that's not how the narrative that other people are using to project on you, right? So it's so powerful to hear you talk about seeing ourselves in the world, and also who's creating those images, that we're also able to create those images and define them on our terms in a way that we're not interchangeable, right? We're able to really see specificity. Like right there, I'm like, oh yeah, an Inuit person totally made that cartoon because I'm recognizing like the tattoos, right? Like I'm recognizing.
Yeah.
And that just adds so much richness to the content. Yeah, and thank you for those quotes. I think those are really good places to start in thinking about those and thinking about the future and where we see ourselves.
Yeah. I love that. And just one more thing about that, we have our own creation stories, and for Navajo people, we have stories about the hero twins and the monster slayer. There's also, I couldn't find the link to it, but there's a link to a movie that was made about monster slayer, about current times and slaying monster. It's so good. So I'm sorry I said that and I can't show it to you, but okay. So
I think I read a book that was based on that recently.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah. I mean, we totally have there's so many stories about amazing, like people who are, and beings who are so powerful. And you know, I'm thinking about like Nana Bojo and all the adventures and all the stories that go with that, or Thunderbird being, and I feel like those would be amazing to see, like to see those images, because when you hear those stories, what you're imagining is so incredible. Yeah, totally incredible in a way that I feel like Spider-Man doesn't stand a chance, right? Like,
right. He's been here for like how many years? And you know, he's been here how many years?
the same
I'm just
one
kidding.
again and again.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on. So I, you know, wanted to start out part of this discussion with a few favorites, a few crossovers in modern times, and I came across like, you know, how do I say modern Indigenous futurisms, because it's happening right now. So I came across this artist, Duhan James. He's Navajo, and I also want to relate it to this other image and how we indigenize our spaces. And of course, you can't not talk about futurisms and not talk about Baby Yoda. But this, you know, this picture here, well, you know, Baby Yoda is. It's just an example of how natives, you know, kind of claim things for their own, and you know, add a little indigenous twist. So we have Baby Yoda there, and I don't know if you've seen the news or anything, but there's been a whole movement of people doing beadwork and art and just pretty much anything we can get our hands on to like make some art around this, because you know, this is, he's cute. And also, you know, people have been having discussions of, you know, what are the origins of Yoda? So, you know, we claimed him. So this other artist I want to, you know, continue talking about is Duhan James, and he's an artist who does linoleum block print. And this, when I came across his work, it just really caught me, because there's a few different things going on right here. And I think this is, for me, that's what the heart of Indigenous Futurisms is reclaiming our spaces and decolonizing, and also inserting where we're living and where we're going now. So he has here a picture of some of the Navajo lifeways. So there's water, you can see corn, images of sheep, and a UFO abducting a hogan. And in an interview, he said that what inspired him for this was, you know, it was a recent interview about the, you know, living as an Indigenous artist during the pandemic and doing, you know, creating art. And he said he had a dream, it made him think about his grandmother and living in a hogan and what that would look like. And it, I guess the image of a UFO made him feel close to her, you know. And so that's, you know, kind of his, you know, UFO might seem scary, but when you can relate it to your grandma or some kind of image that is a safe space, I think that says a lot, especially during the pandemic. And another part of this I want to point out for me as a Navajo person is the plus sign. There's been a lot of reclaiming of this sign. I didn't put it up here, but this symbol represents, you know, the whirlwind symbol, which actually looks like the Nazi symbol, and that was taken from us to be used for them, and you know, as a symbol of hate. But it originates with us as this symbol, and so you'll see a lot of Native artists, Navajo artists, now using that plus sign in their rug weavings, and they're actually even reclaiming that symbol, that the whirlwind symbol with the extra little tails at the end in their art. And of course, it's very controversial, but there's nothing controversial about our own images that we've had for generations. So just wanted to add in about, you know, a little note about living in the pandemic as a Native person. And this person, Duhan James, is on Instagram too. So if you just Google him, he'll come up. And I think we have some questions in the chat. Let me check it out. Okay, some cheers for Baby Yoda. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
even seeing this, so I'm reminded of, I know we had talked about another artist. There was a work we were looking at by Chief Lady Bird that, trying to remember what it was called. It was called something like, we have to think 7 generations into the future. Am I remembering that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Just as this gorgeous image with beadwork and the figure looking out in the horizon, and that it's really referencing this Anishinaabe prophecy about the 7 generations. So how we would think 7 generations in the past, and then also that at the same time as looking back and holding and honoring and thinking about our history and keeping that in mind, that it's informing our present, that we're also thinking 7 generations into the future. And so in that way, if we're even thinking about cosmologies and the way that we think, different worldviews, that right there, we're already thinking historically, we were already thinking about future, right? We were already thinking about futurisms.
Right.
And we could even take that another step. I remember Isaac Akunik for the Fast Runner, so that trilogy about shamans, and he was really asking the question, like, what happened, right? What happened? Where did and going back to that story of the shamans. And there's an interesting, I remember hearing him talk, and he shared this one thought about the shamans and how they said that when man landed on the moon, they said, well, we've already been there, right?
Yeah.
We've already been thinking about larger than the immediacy, thinking about the whole world, thinking about travel and the way that time, a non-linear time. So in that way, that's always kind of been a part of culture and worldview. It really is a dominant society that shut that down, right? It really closed the door on thinking about a future or a present and tied it to the past. Yeah.
Yes, all of that. Yes, just a reminder, I think someone tried to raise your hand. If you could just ask the questions to the panelists or the Q&A, that would be easier, because it's kind of a little bit difficult to navigate a lot. So
yeah, we don't want to miss a single question.
Right. This is Maria, I'll let you.
Right. Okay. So I've recently just moved back to Toronto. I've been here a year today, of all things. So crazy. But before that, I was living in New York for about 9 years. And one of the first places I went when I moved there was to the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, because I wanted to check it out. I wanted to see what they had that was Anishinaabe. I wanted to see how they positioned it. I wanted to know how my people's work was being presented to New York, right? And one of the things that happened as soon as I went in was I realized I felt so removed from everything that was there because of the vitrines, because of the glass. I felt like I couldn't access it. So suddenly I became a cultural ambassador. So I'd take people through, so that's me there, a little bit younger, taking people through. And for myself, really, it was a way to try and find personal ways to connect with what I was seeing, because a lot of those objects were things, some were familiar, but they felt so removed. So even if you see that figure, you're seeing an Anishinaabe headdress and then this beautiful shirt as well. That headdress, that's something I've never seen. Like, we just don't wear, like, people don't wear that style anymore. So it was just, to really look at it and try and understand the materiality of it. So I'm really thinking about the way as an artist that culture is really treated as a sort of bounty or loot that ends up in history museums, right? And that there's a distinction, a barrier that's made with art museums where, because we're delegated to the past, everything is really seen as dead or removed. So that changed for me by inserting my body into the museum. That suddenly there I was, a real living person with a real connection to these things. And I think that it's important to to be aware of how through this history of colonization that Native people are really stuck to the past. And by being stuck to the past, to this romantic notion, to having our narratives controlled by other people, that we're denied a present moment. And therefore, we're also denied any existence in the future. We're seen as having no future because we're only in the past, right? So, so that idea of the futurism is a radical one, maybe not as an insider in a community, but when you're out as the only within a dominant culture, to then have people shift that narrative and realize there is a future sends a really strong message.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just thinking about it and just thinking about, how the work of speaking about our humanities, we have to insert ourselves in those spaces a lot of the time, and it can be draining, like it's also exciting because you can share and see, these, like you said, the headdress that you've never seen before, and it's owned by a museum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you put yourself in that position too, then you're in a position where you're really vulnerable to having to answer many crazy questions again and again, right? So that's also super exhausting. I think I saw a question about repatriation pop up.
Yeah. While you, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll read a comment real quick. So Kristen says, oh my gosh, yes, our culture and cultural properties and even our indigenous knowledge becoming loot and collector items, how repatriation reclaims our cultural items and knowledge.
Right. And even more so. So back to that, but let's keep going forward because I'll come back to it when we talk about exhibitions some more.
Okay, cool.
So I wanted to share this quote that comes from a book. When I first moved to New York, I walked into the Studio Museum in Harlem and saw this amazing exhibition called The Shadows Took Shape. And it was based on Afrofuturism. So it's like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And so this is just a quote from Sun Ra, who's sort of like the founder, who really led that movement of Afrofuturism. So a musician, a poet, artist, so many things. And when I read this phrase, it really resonated to me because this idea of like the shadows took shape and the dance took wings and flew like birds to love, far beyond the cities of yesterday, far beyond the horizon. That suddenly you can really see that there's hope beyond, in this kind of idea of something other, something out there, something far out, like something where anything's possible, where you can have, where your imagination can be free and you're not locked into any kind of, the way that well, I want to say it in a way that I'm not saying like you're totally without accountability, but I think there's so many ways that you can feel limited in who you are and who your identity is. And with Afrofuturism, for sure, that's through the color of your skin. And even though that racial history is has a different politic than Native history, I think that resonated to me to see these artists doing really far out stuff that was just free and liberating for them.
I love that. Okay.
So this was the kind of work that I was making when I first went there. When I first moved to New York. So this is me dressed in this crazy silver suit as Lady Moonrider. And
Mm.
it was very reactionary because I wanted to, I was starting to be included and invited into exhibitions, and I quickly realized it was just they wanted a Native woman. And in a way, it was kind of like, well, if Rebecca Belmore wasn't available, if Cheryl Arundel wasn't available, but you know, I felt like, well, they want it, do they want me? Like, do they want me, not only an Anishinaabe or artist or my materiality? So instead, I made this futuristic suit because I thought it's universal and people are going to project on me anyway. So what I could do is my movements and my actions, my embodiment, whatever I did would be coming from me, but the suit was kind of protecting me from having to be cast in this role as like an Indian princess or whatever crazy thought people were having. And at the same time, the image kept coming to mind of someone like James Fraser with the end of the trail. So that statue that people would often, I'd see it a lot at powwows where people are like, oh, look at that tired warrior coming home after a long day's work. But in actuality, that's meant to signify the death of Native people, right? The defeat. And so here, by positioning it next to this other image of me on an imperial lion outside of the Vancouver Art Museum, our art gallery, I wanted to show I'm the one in control. You know, I'm kind of like, taking this ride and I'm deciding where I'm going. And it's not up to that lion. It's up to me. And then just including that quote, we are colonized when we buy into the systems that constrain us. So just wanting to really exert my own kind of sovereignty. And so part of what I don't know if you can see it in the image, but I had these ridiculously long hair extensions that made these incredibly long braids. And then I had the goggles, these blue goggles that for me were about changing view. And in my mind, I was thinking that the blue was to see water. So to think about life and water as Lady Moonrider. And that also, the idea of being a moonrider and being a lady at that point in my life was also embracing for me to think about my role as a woman and as a young mother, and feeling connected to the cycles of the moon in life, and really ownership around that. One thing they often would say where I'm from is if you're having your period or your aunt's visiting, we'd call it your moon time. So that was a way for me to have real ownership over that at that phase of my life.
I love that you're like, I'm riding this lion. And I really, that made me, I know we're from different tribal nations, but there's so many similarities that I can look at this as a Native woman and totally relate. Especially the long hair, just, our hair is so sacred, and that can be very emotional too, like tying it back to a lot of harmful things that were done to our hair, and people don't really, a lot of just generally don't know about that in Native cultures. And we're going to get into talking more about that, the transdisciplinary aspects of this, and like how it can tie to social justice and empowerment for Native women using, the realm of futurisms. So that just brings it back to tying that to, how our hair is so sacred and ties us to the land.
Absolutely. And that idea of protection, right?
Right.
As a vulnerable part of the population. So I just wanted to share an image of what one of my exhibitions looked like. So this was my first major solo that traveled across Canada and went to Paris. It's called The One Who Keeps on Giving. And it was that the name of that exhibition really comes from a translation of my mother's name. So it's one translation. So when I say it, I'm always like, well, I'm giving as an artist. Artists are always giving, but it really is also me thinking of that connection with my mother as well, who was, Yeah.
Right.
So I just wanted to show this because it really gives a sense of my aesthetic with my own work that's very pared down. I work a lot with industrial felt. I make objects and then I activate them in live performance. So really what I'm imagining in the space is, it looks very modernist, like it looks like what you would expect to see in a gallery. And I think there's something critical around, for me being an artist, that I'm a living artist. I'm a living artist today. And the particular museum that I was working with, the power plant here in Toronto, they're mandated to only work with living artists, and they don't have a collection. They really just create exhibitions to showcase work. So that was kind of a strategy, and also with my own work to share, you know, these formal qualities, and also think about the way that modern art is indebted to so many other people for how they kind of got their aesthetic, but they also got their aesthetic in a way that is very empty and surface, because I feel like they missed out on all the good stuff. So what I'm doing in these exhibitions, so even if you show the next image, is I imagine the exhibition as being a stage for performances. So for each exhibition, for every time the show would travel, I would create a new performance in the gallery where I would collaborate with local people, local artists, and we would activate everything, and we'd get to see things moving and in motion, because so much of I think in art history, we see objects as being fixed or having one meaning, and they're removed. So like those, similar to those objects that were at the Smithsonian, they're by themselves and they're so lonely, but they actually have this whole other life and dimension that when you see them in relationship to a body or a community, they resonate and they come alive, and they speak so much more about the life and the culture of the people and the person who made them. So for me being an artist, I'm really saying, well, I'm a person and I made this, and I made it, but in proximity, if you can see me that way, then you can, it's not such a leap to look at a quill box in a museum or a headdress and be aware someone made that too. And they're from someplace, and they've made so many more things that are a whole body of work as well. So those are some of the things I think about.
Wow. That's so much. And I'm just amazed. I know we did rehearsal, but I just feel like I keep learning more and more, but also it keeps speaking to me about what that meant and what it continues to mean for, the futurisms, and what that looks like, and how do we use our voices, or I guess in any way. I mean, I also wanted to add this futurisms. There's also other artists out there who are writing. I'm totally blanking on her name right now. I'm so sorry. But there's, if you look at, I can't find it right now. There's a writer, a Navajo writer who's writing a lot of science fiction right now. That's really great. And also I mentioned the film and everything. So a lot of people are expanding in these different areas of, media, and I think that's so great. And so tell us about, is it a jingle dress?
Yeah. So this is a pretty old piece. It must be like 18 years old now. So this is a jingle dress I made, and what do I want to say about it? I mean, there's so much. I feel like I could just talk about this for an hour, but I won't. But this piece is really tied to writing and writers. So I was thinking about a lot of stuff, but I was also thinking about the way, the idea of embodying knowledge, that in Anishinaabe, we're not supposed to write things down. You write things down to forget them. But this piece was about paying tribute or honoring the Indigenous voices, the people who are writing down our stories. So what I did was usually you have one jingle for each day of the year, but in this case, I put the name of a Native American author. So I came across this list that listed a slew of people in North America, and I put them down, and I left some jingles blank at the back to kind of save space or hold space for those voices that were yet to come. So now I feel like there would be a whole powwow dancers, like so many if I was to do it now, and I'm sure there were then too, right?
Right.
And then on the chest on either side, it's words that make the floral motif. So it's kind of like each letter is a bead, and those are 2 Anishinaabe prayers. So this piece is at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian in New York. And what I like about the Jingle Dress is that it is a contemporary dance. So it's something that came after contact. It's something that's about survival and healing and wellness. And I think it really embodies this idea of, for me, when I think of my ancestors, if I think of the art that was made by Native people, that it's innovative, it's experimental, it's cutting edge, it's it's so many, it's so exciting, but that's not how we hear it talked about, right? Like if I think if it's made, discovered how to make a birch bark canoe today, people would be like, that person's so sustainable, like they must really know birch trees to do that, like they must be scientists, like they would be raving. But because it's like this, like all that knowledge just is dismissed. So I feel like the Jingle Dress does a good job of showing that resourcefulness of the jingles, the hand current churn jingles, and it for me showed and represents that things can evolve to the times, right? So this was responding to another epidemic at the time where people were dying, and there's a lot of pain and hurt there. And to see since I made this dress, to see the way that I don't know more with the Jingle Dress dancers, like how there's so much more awareness and knowledge around the jingle that has happened since then. It's just really incredible. But I love this piece because I look at it and I'm like, oh, it's very old school now, right? Very, but and so it's just made from lined paper, and it's made to my dimensions at that time. So the idea would be that I could wear it, but I didn't like wearing it because it just wrestled. Like it didn't make the sound, right? Jingle is all about the sound.
Oh yeah. Yes. You're sounding like shuffling around in paper. So I love your comment, Kristen. She says, oh, that gives me chills, including leaving the blank spaces for next writers. Wow.
Yeah. I remember when I made, so I can always remember that this is 18 years old because I made it right after the birth of my son. And it was in the kitchen, and I would just leave it set up on this dressmaker form. And when I would get up at night to use the restroom, I'd see it. And every time I would sort of jump because I would think it was a ghost.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty powerful piece for me to think about how much knowledge is there.
Right.
And then a bit later, then I returned to the jingles. So here, I didn't want to, I thought if I'm gonna make, so that idea of, well, you can't hear the jingle, but I wanted to think about what does that feel like when you really unravel and kind of come back to the idea of embodying sound, and how your movements, if you can hear them, change. So you're like becoming a musical instrument, or you're thinking of balance, you're thinking about rhythm and cycles. And thinking about water and creation and all those good things that the jingle represents, and healing. But I didn't want to make a jingle dress because I knew if I made a jingle dress, that would be for dancing, right? I'd be like, oh, I just dance in that. But for my artwork, what I could do is make a pair of boots. And it allowed me to kind of get around the space of jingle dress being only like very gender specific. It has to be a dress. So suddenly I was able to embody sound in another way. So I started working with the jingles. So you see me here, just once I had them, I just wanted to either jump up and down or run back and forth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's the jingle boots. Although this was interesting because once I made them, people, I had to be very careful with how I showed them because it's very easy for people to think, oh, this is just what Anishinaabe wear. They wear jingle boots. And I'm like, well, actually, maybe they will. Maybe it'll catch on. I don't know. But right now, I mean, people wear bells, but not like a jingle boot. So yeah, I think that's why art is so, as an artist, that I can just run with things. It gives me the freedom to do that in a way, to explore the materials.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love how that you said that, the gender and having that be expanded on without having it be, just the jingle dress because, it makes the noise and the sounds and everything.
So then here's, yeah, so I just ran with the jingle, and this is a jingle spiral that I had heard about. So if we think about modernism, we are often thinking about geometric forms. So I see the spiral, and I went to a language symposium and an Anishinaabe language symposium in Sudbury, and Alan Corbier was talking about the spiral, and he said, well, Maria, the spiral is the surface of the water right before underwater panther is about to break the surface. But his head will, that's where his head will come out, or their head will come out. And I thought about that, and I was like, oh, wow, like that changes the way I think of a spiral. And if we think of a circle being like a return to the point of departure, that spiral goes on and on and on, right? So it's continuous and never ending. So I wanted to be that panther and make this head flap where my head would pop up in the middle of the spiral. So I made this and I tried it on. So here you see me, holding up, you could see the spiral and trying different poses with it. And I realized quickly, so I'll make things and then I decide if I want to use them in a performance. And sometimes that doesn't happen right away. But with this one, I was like, I don't want to wear it. Like, what am I going to do in the jingle spiral? So I sold it.
Oh.
I sold it with the condition that I could borrow it back in the future for a performance. And they said, sure, Maria, anytime you want. Absolutely. So that was sort of the term of it. And then if we look at so then what it's kind of important because I came back to it. So when I had the show, The One Who Keeps on Giving, I knew I wanted to I was doing a commission and I wanted to center the commission around a painting that my mother did. So that's the painting that you see in the image. And of course, in order to do that, I had to ask all my family about that, right? So it comes back to kinship.
Right.
So of course, an Anishinaabe woman makes a painting of water, of course, because we're on the day, we're about the water, we're a nation that's about water, we're on the Great Lakes, we're from an island. Of course, like the water is the subject. Of course, my mom made this painting, and it's of, where we're from. So I invited my siblings and to join me, and we each kind of went through a different movement around this water. So this was a work that looks, I think it's codified as being very native, right? Like you see a dancer. And so, but the jingle spiral reappeared for this work because I was talking to Deanne, and Deanne said, well, I don't think I want to wear my regalia because she's a competition power dancer. I said, that's fine. Maybe I can make you something. And then I was like, why don't you wear the jingle spiral? So what happened was to have this incredibly athletic Anishinaabe wear the Jingle Spiral, she really set the tone for the whole piece. Like it starts with her and it ends with her, and she moves around the space. And she brought her movements as a dancer. You know, she's a shawl dancer, so she holds her arms up. So that was perfect for the spiral. And I felt like the vocabulary of her as like in the choreography as a dancer, her movement vocabulary, I learned so much about dance by seeing her wear the spiral in a way that, because I'm not a competition power dancer, I would never have been able to do that, right? So, the way that, yeah, thinking about having the freedom in my art to bring these objects into conversation with cultures when they really come alive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have one question, but I'll save that for, because we're getting close to a little bit of the end. Okay, so as we're closing, I just want to bring it back to the, you know, the idea, or I guess the academic sense of transdisciplinary is all our relations. If we want to decolonize that term and make it our own, of what that work, these are things we've always known as Native people. This is how we relate to ourselves, to each other, to the land, and it's, you know, it's a term I think that is very welcoming and connecting to a lot of tribal nations. What do you think? What do you think, Maria?
Yeah, so it's a really recent term
Yeah.
that has come up, and prior to that, we would more commonly hear multidisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. What that's really looking at is thinking about many different disciplines, you know, many different fields of study, that rather than each of those kind of doing their own thing and then connecting, that they mash everything up together and
Right.
do something new that is informed by the languages of all of those. So in that way, it's a very um, um, it's really grounded for me. It's really grounded in reciprocity, and and allows me to address the way that the history of objects and the objects that I create, or the non-object objects that I create, that they are so multidimensional, and that
Mm-hmm.
they, you know, are connected to, in the way that the Jingle Spiral is connected to place and land and body and science and creation and cosmology and underwater panther and like home and so many things, that if I was to just, that it opens up what that could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Uh, yeah. It also makes me think of just in our own Navajo traditional teachings of like how, you know, we have this prayer. It's we say Hojon Nashafto, like I walk around with beauty, and it's a very grounding thing for us. And in our own teachings, in our ways, we walk in respect to like things ahead of us, things below us, things all around us, things above us, and only with the term of beauty, like we recognize that everything is related and has an impact on each other. And so I think that speaks to me as like in my own journey of reclaiming my Native identity, like how do I carry myself as a Navajo woman? How do I relate to people? Like, and I think that the whole back to, you know, all our relations makes me think of like, yeah, there's so very, I mean, here in the States, there's fewer than 2% of the population is Native American. And there's, you know, there's not a lot of us, but the few of us who are there, I mean, I see them as, you know, my relations. If it's okay. but like, you know, that made me think about that when you were talking about, um, you know, how you relate to that. And So if you have any questions, this is a good time to put them in the Q&A or ask the poll. We'll start out with, I just, wanted to bring it back to also the arts as a language of humanities. I'm curious what you want to say about these last two images.
Yeah, what did I want to say about these? Okay, so so the work is called Double Punch. So it's a fairly, it's, I want to say it's a new work, but it actually isn't so new. So what, on one side you're seeing the piece, the double punch piece, which is, rather than having the jingles, you see like these sort of sleigh bells on it, right? So this idea of like how you carry yourself, right? So you can imagine the sound that these would make, like that would be pretty amazing. But at the same time, I don't think I want to be hit by that. So it's like having like maybe not self-defense, but being capable and being able and having tools and being able to care for yourself and defend yourself. That's all those are all things I'm thinking about. And I just love these ones because of course they have the little turtle on them.
I love it.
Yeah. And then the other image is a collaboration that I was doing with an artist from Vancouver, BC, named Charlene Vickers. So we collaborate once in a while, and we would just make a bunch of stuff, and then we would go out and do something crazy. And the whole idea was that we just wanted to do stuff that would be unexpected and that we felt good about, and it would show a connection, like a connection that we have together, for people to see not one but two people. We're both Anishinaabe. We're very different, but that it becomes a sort of exercise in our trust and love and care for each other, and how we navigate that in our communication. So people are able to see that, and they see us do all kinds of unexpected things. So even there, we're wearing the jingle boots, but she's wearing one and I'm wearing the other, and we're both wearing one of the gloves. So this is early on, before the next iteration where I added the sound to them, but we're each wearing a glove thinking that we're strong and capable. And the other hand was this beautiful red evening glove with fringe. We're also elegant and, so we balance and we carry ourselves. So owning femininity and owning, everything, the masculinity, the femininity, that it's not a binary thing, but owning our whole selves together. So that's what that work is. Yeah, I mean, I just think it makes such a difference to see bodies, to see people, and that you're able to see these relationships. And I also like the way that after a performance, someone in recalling it that description to me, I'm like, I almost live for that. I'm like, I want to hear someone say, oh, I went. And so this was at Indian Market during, and we showed up with these red bags with crazy stuff in them. And people kept asking us, oh, you must be artists. Are you artists? Where's your booth? And we're like, yeah, we're artists, but I don't think we're the artists you think we are, right? And then we brought out all this stuff, and then we demoed what we had, and we had to make signs that said "not for sale," free demos here, just as a way to kind of interact together in public. Yeah,
I'm not for sale. So funny. Okay, so we have one question. Beautiful art. I would love to see it in person. Where is Miss Hupfield's art exhibited?
Oh yeah, thank you. So always looking for opportunities to show my work, but most recently my work is up. It was up and it's still up at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. So for a show that's called 10 years, no, not 10 years. It's called 9 Years Towards the Sun. And it's a bunch of the work here that you've seen, like the jingle boots, the double punch, and we really wanted to show focus on the performance element of my work. So what happens throughout the exhibition is there's performances, and then there's monitors where the performances would then display. So yeah, museums are not made for bodies. They're made to protect work. So I wanted to shift that a little bit and think about when you enter the space, it's made for our bodies, and you're aware that things will happen in the space, and things have happened in the space, and these items are meant to be connected with. Yeah.
Right. I love that. I know I keep saying that, but I just wanted to also note before the next question, I meant to start out with this, but I came across Maria's work when I was at the Heard Museum, and if you have a chance to go, it's amazing. It really blew me away, and it made me realize what, for me as a Native person, what that looks like, and challenging my own self and my own space and the places that I'm not very comfortable with going. It also came at a time where I was just like, my identity as a Native person and being in grad school, I was like, oh my God, what's going on? And it really spoke to me. And so when we, it also goes to another question, how new is Indigenous Futurisms? Yeah, it was my first time really coming across with that space in a museum and expanding on that and seeing, you know, you moving and hearing you. It was amazing. So, so how new is Indigenous Futurisms? It comes from, I didn't see a date, but
When is the quote from?
it is from Dr. Oh my God, I'm losing my notes. I think it's about around the time I have to get out of this, and I don't want to get out of that, but
Right.
sorry.
So artists have been using this and playing with this idea for a while. Like I think that the late James Luna was using, you know, riffing off of this idea of futurities as well in their work. But I think the term, so artists have, I think, constantly been looking at that and referencing it. I feel like I've even seen quill work that uses, you know, has an alien or something in it. I feel like I've seen that. But the term itself is relatively new. Now, I would say that I've seen more exhibitions pop up in catalogs and content around the term probably in the past couple of years. So I think it's in the art world, it's something that's more, we're seeing more and more of. But I did want to share with the idea of Afrofuturism, there's this artist, Stephanie Dinkins, who does a lot of work with robotics, our AI figures that are African-American replicas of her. And what she talks about is, she's saying, well, I want to get over this idea of Afrofuturism. I want to talk about, how about Afro-nowism? Let's have we need a moment now. We need to exist now. So I think that in that community, there's a lot of different movements that come up that then the Native arts community then also connects with and benefits from and is informed by as well. But as interested as I am in the future, and of course, like if we think of that seventh generation having that future, I do think that we can't let go of this moment, and we need to ensure that we're present and seen and heard today.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing that it's within the past 10 years, and again, it's Dr. Grace Dillon who coined the term, and she has an anthology, Walking in the Clouds, an anthology of Indigenous science fiction, and she outlines how science fiction can aid processes of decolonization. So another question, I think we'll end with this, it's about 8 o'clock. Would you do pop-ups across the US?
Of course. Well, because I just moved back to Toronto, I haven't been thinking so much about pop-ups, but I am working with the Vera List Center and for a fellowship called I'm a Borderlands Fellow with the University of Arizona and Vera List Center. So I'll be doing some more work in Tempe and also in New York coming up in the next 2 years. So we'll see, and then we'll see what exhibition I come up with next after the one at the Herd ends. And there's a really good article in, it's called Hypoallergic. So Hypoallergic did a great article or a great review of that exhibition that's currently up at the Herd, so 9 Years Towards the Sun. And they have some amazing images of the show too. So that's another great way to see more of that work if you're interested.
Okay, thanks. And I'll read one more comment real quick.
Someone knows hyperallergic. Right
Yeah.
on.
I was thinking about the idea that our historic creative pieces are dismissed and our innovations being considered only historical and like not modern, like cavemanish. And yet there are so many items, knowledge, and even the idea of democracy originated with us as Indigenous people. Yes, we could talk about that for like a bunch of different series. And evolving to meet challenges around us. Yes, that's a great way to end with your comment and, you know, again, connecting it back to our lifeways, which have provided us direction and continue to give us direction as we move forward. So thank you again, Maria. I loved this so much. It was very fun. If you have a chance, you can, if you have a chance, you can visit our website for more information on Native American Heritage programs. Maria Hupfield, if you have any information, I can send that along in an email. So check out for an email tomorrow with some of the quotes and resources we use. And also, if you could, our program here in Missouri is very new still, so I'm still shaping a lot of our programming. So I'm going to send out a very, very quick survey. If you could fill that out, that'd be so helpful. Hearing your voice and what you'd want to see in terms of our programming in the humanities. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thanks, Maria, and we will see you soon.